Imagine you're driving down a long straight stretch of Australian highway. In the distance, you see a dust cloud, then headlights. As it grows closer, you realize it isn't one truck, but what looks like a convoy, except it's all being hauled by a single prime mover. That's a road train. At its simplest, it's a truck towing multiple trailers, sometimes three, sometimes four, sometimes more. Fully loaded, they can stretch more than 50 meters and weigh over 200 tons. For a British viewer used to lorries confined to 16.5 meters and 44 tons, road trains are an alien species. They exist because Australia demands them. Vast distances, sparse rail networks, and isolated communities mean goods must travel hundreds of miles across desert and scrubland. In that environment, ordinary trucks simply aren't enough. Road trains are the only machines tough enough to bridge the gap. The story of Australian transport does not begin with roaring diesel engines, but with the slow, steady pace of camels. By the late 19th century, much of Australia's interior was still a mystery to European settlers. The climate was harsh, water scarce, and distances immense. Horses and oxen, familiar in Britain, were hopeless in such conditions. Camels, however, thrived. Imported from Afghanistan and British India, they could survive on little water and endure blistering heat. Soon, long camel caravans became the arteries of the outback. They carried everything a remote settlement might need: food, mail, tools, even building materials for telegraph lines and rail projects. The cameleers themselves, mostly Afghans and their descendants, became legendary figures, nicknamed Ghans. Entire towns depended on their regular arrivals. But progress eventually caught up. As railways pushed further inland and trucks began to appear after the First World War, the camel's dominance faded. By the mid-20th century, the caravans were largely gone. Still, their legacy remained. The vision of a train of cargo stretching across the desert, later reborn in the form of the mighty road train. Now, if you're fascinated by how Australia moved from camels to engines, stick around. The next chapter dives into the very first road trains and the pioneers who drove them. The earliest motorized road trains were experimental. One of the most famous was the AEC government road train, built in Britain in 1934 and shipped to the Northern Territory. Designed for the Australian Army, it looked like a hybrid of a locomotive and a lorry, pulling three powered trailers. Although it was clumsy and slow, it proved that linking multiple trailers to one prime mover could work in the harsh Australian interior. By the 1950s, private companies began to adapt American and European trucks for road train duty. Farmers and hauliers, particularly in the cattle industry, saw the potential. Cattle stations, enormous ranches sometimes bigger than small European countries, needed to move stock quickly to railheads or ports. Road trains replaced weeks of droving on horseback with a single day's drive. Mining companies followed suit, hauling ore and equipment from remote pits to coastal hubs. The Australian outback had found its machine. The post-war boom saw diesel-powered transformed trucking. Engines became more powerful, roads were gradually sealed, and governments realized that allowing longer, heavier combinations was practical. In Western Australia and the Northern Territories especially, road trains grew to 3 or 4 trailers long. By the 1970s, Australia had cemented its reputation as the land of the road train. Stories from early drivers are filled with grit and determination. Some recall wrestling overloaded trucks on dirt tracks where every bend threatened disaster. Others remember nights under a sky so vast and empty that the only sound was the rumble of the engine. These pioneers set the culture that still surrounds road train driving today, a mix of toughness, skill, and a deep respect for the landscape. So, what exactly makes a road train tick? At the front is the prime mover, the truck itself. These are no ordinary lorries. They are fitted with reinforced chassis, heavy-duty suspensions, and enormous diesel engines, often producing upwards of 600 horsepower and mountains of torque. The power is essential when you're pulling 3 or 4 trailers loaded with cattle or minerals. Behind the prime mover are the trailers. They're connected by special coupling systems, known as converter dollies, which allow each trailer to pivot independently. This makes the train flexible enough to negotiate bends, although bend in the outback often means a gentle curve rather than a hairpin. Stopping such a beast is just as important as moving it. Road trains rely on advanced air braking systems, with each trailer fitted with its own brakes linked to the prime mover. Extra lighting and oversized signage warn other road users of the train's sheer length. Regulations require flags, flashing lights, and the unmistakable yellow road train boards mounted front and back. To appreciate the engineering, let's talk numbers. A road train can weigh more than 200 tons fully loaded. The maximum permitted length varies by state, but in Western Australia, some combinations exceed 50 meters. To put that in perspective, that's half the length of a football pitch. The UK's heaviest lorries look almost modest by comparison. Engines are designed to run at high torque for long hours, sometimes pushing through 40-degree heat with little chance of rest. Fuel tanks are colossal, often holding thousands of litres because petrol stations can be hundreds of miles apart. Everything about a road train is oversized because the distances and loads demand it. Driving a road train is unlike any other job. Routes are measured not in miles, but in days. A typical journey might involve hauling cattle from a remote station in the Northern Territory to a processing plant 800 miles away. Drivers often spend nights in sleeper cabs parked in roadside bays, with little more than a thermos, a radio, and the hum of insects for company. Hazards are everywhere. Kangaroos, emus, and even wandering cattle can dart across the highway at any moment. Dust storms can reduce visibility to zero. Tire blowouts on one of the many trailers are common, and fixing them on a desolate track requires patience and skill. Breakdowns can mean waiting hours, sometimes days, for help to arrive. Yet, many drivers speak fondly of the solitude. There's a pride in handling a machine of such size and power, and a quiet camaraderie among those who make a living in this harsh environment. CB radios and now satellite phones keep drivers in touch, but the reality is that much of the job is done alone, with only the horizon for company. Operating a road train is not simply about pointing the truck and pressing the accelerator. Logistics play a massive role. Loading and unloading cattle requires careful handling to prevent injury to livestock. Mining loads must be balanced precisely to avoid dangerous swaying. Route planning is crucial. Some roads cannot take the weight. Others have bridges too short to accommodate the length. States regulate how many trailers a road train can pull, so operators must plan their trips carefully. In South Australia, for example, doubles are common, while in Western Australia, triples and quads dominate. Crossing state borders can mean adjusting loads. Despite these complications, road trains remain the most efficient way to move bulk goods across the outback. Road trains are more than just transport. They're a part of Australian identity. They symbolize endurance, innovation, and the stubborn will to connect a vast continent. They've appeared in films, documentaries, and folklores. Anyone who's watched Mad Max 2 will remember the climactic chase involving a giant truck, inspired by real road trains. To Australians, the road train is a working hero, as iconic as the sheep station or the miner's pickaxe. To outsiders, especially Britons used to traffic jams on the M25, they seem almost mythical. There is also a sense of awe. These machines are both practical tools and feats of engineering, adapted perfectly to their environment. Comparing Britain and Australia highlights just how different haulage can be. In Britain, the challenge is congestion, limited space, and dense infrastructure. Our lorries are capped by weight and length because our roads and towns were never built for anything larger. In Australia, the challenge is the complete opposite. Not enough roads, enormous distances, and few settlements. Where a British driver might see 5 service stations in an hour, an Australian driver might not see one all day. This contrast explains why road trains are uniquely Australian. Few other nations could justify or even accommodate them. Canada uses them in its remote north, and parts of Africa have experimented, but nowhere do they define the culture as strongly as they do in Australia. Road trains continue to evolve. Today, modern prime movers are fitted with advanced electronics, better suspensions, and safety systems that make driving slightly less punishing. Mining companies run specialized ultra-road trains, hauling iron ore with payloads topping 300 tons. Some of the longest road trains ever recorded have stretched to over 1,000 meters during controlled tests, though such giants are not practical for everyday use. Their economic importance is impossible to overstate. Without road trains, remote cattle stations could not reach market, mines could not export, and outback towns would struggle to survive. They are not a novelty. They are essential infrastructure, stitched into the fabric of Australians' economy and way of life. From camel caravans led by Afghan cameleers to diesel titans hauling unimaginable loads, the story of Australia's road trains is a tale of sheer adaptation. These machines were not born out of ambition or spectacle, but out of necessity. In a continent where railways could only reach so far and towns were scattered hundreds of miles apart, something extraordinary was required. Camels once carried mail, supplies, and tools through the desert, their long trains forming lifelines across the outback. When engines arrived, they took over that same role, creating mechanical caravans capable of conquering both distance and climate. To those of us in Britain, accustomed to narrow roads, compact lorries, and short journeys, road trains can seem unbelievable. Yet, in the vast silence of the outback, where the horizon never ends, they make perfect sense. Dust billows behind them, cattle shift in trailers, and engines roar across landscapes that would swallow smaller vehicles whole. These are not just trucks, they are arteries of survival, keeping mines, stations, and entire communities alive. So the next time you see a lorry crawling along the A1, imagine its mighty cousin, 4 trailers long, 200 tons heavy, and utterly unstoppable. Road trains, the kings of the Australian outback. If you've enjoyed this journey from camel caravans to the thunder of diesel giants, don't stop here. Hit subscribe and join us for more untold stories of machines that shaped our world. Drop a comment if you've ever seen a road train in action, and share this video with a friend who loves history and transport.